Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my last debate of all time, and the final debate of term. It's extraordinarily exciting to see so many of you here for our last event. And as is a union tradition of sorts, we're going to do our best to remember how in-person handovers used to go. The way this roughly works is that my wonderful Michaelmas team will be passing over to the Lent team to mark the changeover of the Union Guard. So I would like to invite, first and foremost, our wonderful, wonderful debates officer, Sophie West, to exchange with Sam Hunt for Lent. Thank you. And now, the Michaelmas Speakers Officer, Phoebe Pickering, will exchange with Lara Brown. We then have our Social Events Officer, Letty Ryder, who will swap with Eleanor Shimeli. And our truly wonderful Equalities Officer, Zara, could not be here tonight. But let's imagine that she is, and pretend that David is hugging her anyway. Zara is swapping with David Kwan. And with that, we come to my final few sentences as President. It has been a delight and an honour and a pleasure to be your President for the last term, and I could not be more proud and more excited to be handing over to James Vitale.
Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be chairing this evening's debate and to have the opportunity to say well done and goodbye to a dear friend of mine. The motion before the House this evening is this House believes what is morally wrong may be politically right. I'm sure you all know the drill. We're going to have two paper speakers, proposition, opposition, followed by some floor speeches, another two paper speakers, a round of floor speeches, and then we'll finish with the final two paper speakers. Nothing starts on time here. Sorry, we're running late. So I will get on with the debate. Opening for the proposition this evening is Keir Bradwell. Keir Bradwell is a third-year historian and politics student at Queen's College. By the time he starts speaking, he will no longer be president of the Cambridge Union. This is the bio I was given. Keir, you have the ears of the House.
I'm going to pour some water. Well, it almost feels unnecessary at this point to say, to be able to begin this speech by saying, Mr. President. It's quite exciting to be able to do that. So much hard work has duly paid off. What you will learn in this job, Mr. President, is what I have had the privilege to discover, and that is that this place our members have entrusted to you now is many things. Most obviously, the Union is simply the place to be. In the words of my manifesto, it is the centre of Cambridge's social life. It's catchy. It is a place to make a name for yourself, although for some of us, not quite the name we might have liked. And it is, don't forget, the world's oldest free speech society, although in the words of our wonderful retiring Versa Bill, it is also increasingly a glorified celebrity management agency. These things be as they may, what really stands the Union apart is that the Union is a vehicle. It's somewhere that people come to advance all sorts of causes. And in my dying moments here, before I am finally swept off the stage for good, I would like to argue for a cause of my own. I want to argue for a way of viewing the world, viewing politics, that has become to be known political realism. Because tonight's motion is intended to get to the heart of a distinction that I think is of absolute importance. I think there are two ways to view politics. One way is to ask, how should things be? To map out an imagined ethical utopia and work backwards, deciding how to act based on how real politics falls short of your dreams. Some people do this oblivious to political realities. Other people realise that real politics is more difficult, but the only answer they have is to try and achieve their utopia a bit more slowly. But that's not my way of looking at politics. I think we should look at politics differently. I think politics is not about pursuing justice. It's about managing conflict. And more importantly, I also think that's a good thing. And in the next few minutes, through Hobbes, Weber, and then concocting a massive straw man that I hope you'll forgive me for, I'm going to try and prove to you why that is. First, the sort of serious intellectual bit, and I will apologise, this is quite boring, but if I just do the straw man, there's no intellectual merit behind what I'm saying at all, so you have to just pretend. One reason why viewing politics my way is, I think, desirable or right is what Hobbes teaches us. It's a negative justification of politics. At this point, I would rather my notes were all in the right direction. In his best work of political theory that's ever been written or composed, or whatever will be written or composed, Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan shows us why politics is necessary. Because people, without it, will kill each other. And any set of institutional arrangements we can come up with, he argues, to prevent that outcome for ourselves, is something we are logically compelled to establish. Yes, go on.
We have politics, people are still killing each other.
Oh, I would argue that in the times when people are killing each other, what they have is the absence of politics. If they had politics and they resolved their disputes through political means, they wouldn't be killing each other. What you're describing is resort to violence, which is, in my view, anti-political. And there is, I think, there's a large debate to be had here about what is politics, is it a means of structuring? Right, I'm not going to get into that because this speech is so much longer than the... Josh, can I just say, no, please, this is... Right, it's already off the rails. I haven't even read through this. It's too long, and the POIs is not going to help. Right, the point being is the purpose of politics, if you are a Hobbesian, is to secure order, right? And you may reasonably ask, why is this relevant? We don't seem that much at risk of a breakdown in order. I anticipated that POI, I didn't anticipate this one, so I did my best. But the point that Hobbes is making is not just that we're at risk of killing each other, it's that we compete. We are prone to conflict. We don't simply agree on what the higher moral ends of human society is or are. As Matt Sleet, the brilliant political theorist, wrote, we disagree about morality. That is why we need politics. Politics being the least bad dispute mechanism we have is Hobbes' negative justification for why politics exists.
Can I interject, please, so quickly?
Yes, of course.
Politics is power relations.
Yes.
It's power. We don't think of it as absolute power. Look at what happened with Abraham Lincoln.
Can I just say at this point that I didn't take that POI? I will reply to it anyway. I agree with the power. I think I'm completely on board with the PowerPoint. In fact, in a minute, my entire argument is going to come down to power interests. What? I cannot emphasize enough how dangerous POIs are tonight. This is not a good outcome. What I wanted to say is this. I make the Hobbesian point, but none of you are thinking, oh, that's very good. Yes, we love the fact that politics exists because we don't get to kill each other. That's a bad outcome. So my second argument for why this motion is so obviously correct, and it is correct because I wrote it and chose it, is the Weberian view, right? Max Weber identified... No, absolutely not. Max Weber identified, like Hobbes, that politics is about conflict. But he was worried about something else. He was worried about the rise of bureaucracy in mass modernising societies, by the demise of spiritualism. He observed that tradition no longer legitimated societies in the way it once did. He was worried, in short, about the loss of values in modern society. And politics, for Weber, was the escape mechanism. Politics was a means for self-determination. It was a historical activity. It would allow individuals and groups the means to control their own destiny. Weber thought the bureaucrats were creating a value consensus, that in doing so we were losing something of what it meant to be human. Conflict may be difficult and it may be challenging, but at least everyone involved has something inside themselves to fight for. So the positive reason to see politics as managing disagreement is that it doesn't try to imply that there are moral values around which we can all agree, or under which we would all be better off. And in doing so, it doesn't try to limit our scope for political personality. Political conflict is how we assert ourselves above and beyond in the world around us. Jocelyn, I'm just going to tell you now, I am going to have to ignore that, because otherwise it's not going to make any sense. I've done the two intellectual bits, so I'm now going to come on to the straw man. And the straw man I would like to attack tonight goes by the name of Rod Liddell. Now, one moment. You may think it's unfair of me to use my going out speech tonight to take shots at one man who objectively is not at this debate and has no right to reply. And it is unfair. It is unfair. I am biased against Rod Liddell. But that is actually a new development, because last month Rod Liddell got very angry in the Sunday Times and labelled me a sanctimonious child. No, I cannot emphasise enough, no. It was slightly upsetting, if I'm honest. But for the purposes of this speech, it does reassure me greatly that ad hominem attacks that are completely unjustified are actually fair game. No. And actually, sanctimonious child is bad, but I should probably be rather grateful for the treatment I got. On a general election night 2005, a very angry Rod Liddell then received a police caution for common assault after allegedly punching his pregnant girlfriend. No wonder he's so worried about cancel culture. Now, why Rod Liddell? Well, this is where the straw man comes in. I think Rod Liddell will be on the opposition tonight. Rod Liddell has in his head a perfect vision for a beautiful moral society. His perfect society is a world in which everyone can say whatever they want all of the time, and there are no repercussions or consequences. No, can we just intervene here? I do not wish to take a POI from this man. Right. In Rod Liddell's world, there are no consequences for what you say. You can say whatever you want, and you should be allowed to do anything, and no one should have any right to reply or retort to you at all. That's the world in which he wants to live. A world in which he hadn't got in quite a lot of trouble for saying that the ideal date for an election would be one where, I quote, Muslims are forbidden to do anything. Therefore, it won't surprise you to learn that when I apologised to this society for the Hitler impression the speaker gave here a few weeks ago, Rod Liddell got rather offended. To be precise, he called me a dim totalitarian, which is upsetting, actually, because those on my committee will know I'm only one of those two things. And I did GCSE triple science. I think Rod Liddell thinks that the purpose of the Union, as a basically political institution, is to bring us closer to Rod Liddell's perfect imagined utopia, and that my job is to enforce that view on all of you. And certainly I think that he thinks that by being mean about me in the Sunday Times, he'll scare me into doing what he wants. But as it happens, I'm not that far away from Rod Liddell's views on free speech. I do believe in a world of consequences, but I also got involved in the Union because it's a free speech society. And by the time you become president of the Union, you have to at least somewhere beyond the free speech side of the argument. But the crucial point is this. I believe freedom of expression is vital to the Union, but I believe so because I think it serves a function in helping us to do what politics is all about, manage conflict. That it does so is why free expression is so valuable everywhere, not just here. What I don't think is that freedom of expression is itself uncontested, that there is no moral conflict to be had about it, to be debated, to be resolved, that there are no limits to free speech that we ought to quite justifiably and rightly argue about, that the purpose of the Union is to achieve everything that Rod Liddell wants. Instead, it is through and thanks to our commitment to freedom of expression that we are able to debate these kinds of issues. My role as president was not to enforce a Liddelian view of free speech on the Union. It was not even to enforce my view of free speech on the Union. It was certainly not to try and find a consensus between two sides of the culture war once Hitlergate went national, because people are irreconcilably going to oppose and conflict on this issue, and no amount of theoretical, moral, utopian perfection is going to do away with that fact. So my job was to do something else, to manage the conflict. On the one hand, to try and contain the damage of too much disagreement, to try and prevent people going full-on John Cleese, to try and preserve the Union's reputation as somewhere where people feel comfortable coming to our events and our debates, to keep the ship from keeling over, to preserve as much of the pre-Hitlergate order as I possibly could. But as Weber would have noticed, my job was also more than that. It was to see that there is a positive value in the Union being a space for exactly this sort of disagreement, even on the topic of free speech itself. And this brings me back, Mr. President, to what the Union is. So the Union's role as somewhere to advance a cause. No matter what else came with it, it is to the immense credit of this place and a source of pride for me that this House is where a debate over the limits of free speech has taken place. The people who think I should have cut Andrew Graham Dixon off mid-sentence are as able to stand up here and tell me that I cocked it up as the people who think I am, to quote one member of Twitter, the epitome of arrogant woke culture. That our commitment to free expression gave people of all moral views on the issue of free expression the chance to tell me that I'd messed it up. As Weber so rightly identified over 100 years ago, there is something intrinsically precious and valuable and human about the fact we disagree. The value of this place, like all of political life, is not that the Union ascends us to some kind of higher morality. It could only be so if we were under the illusion that our value conflicts could or even should be resolved. And though I love Hobbes, we shouldn't just be concerned about preserving order at all costs either. The value of the Union is that our debates, and debates about our debates, give voice to a value plural world. That is why I was happy not to shut down those I disagree with on free speech on the way that plenty wanted me to, and certainly Rod Liddle did. And that is an example, I hope, that shows that what is politically right is not always necessarily what I think is morally right. Not only that, I hope it shows why all of us should be ever so glad that that is the case, and that the union still matters too. Now, if I may be very briefly allowed one final indulgence as president before I step down, I would like just to say this. You should get involved in this place. Don't be put off. Because for all of the talk I make about politics and morality, there is one thing that really isn't up for debate. This place is bloody good fun. And being president of it has been the privilege of a lifetime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keir, for that marvellous speech. And let me just take one last opportunity to say congratulations on an excellent term. The departing president had asked me to intervene and stop some of our members making interventions. So I think it would be in the spirit of his speech to just say that I will never do that. You are always welcome to stand up and intervene as long as you are doing it respectfully. We move straight across to the opposition and Phoebe Pickering. Phoebe is a third-year philosopher at Downing College. In a past life, she was in Corpus Christi. Who wrote these? I am your housemate, I should know. In a past life, she was also chairman of KUKA. She is, for another hour or so, the union's serving Speaker's officer. Phoebe, you have the floor.
When my dear friend and housemate, Keir, asked me if I would like to debate his presidential motion tonight, which can only, of course, be described as an ode to him and his deepest academic interests, I think the vision he held in his mind was one whereby my support for his ideas would be offered and great displays of loyalty would be exhibited. Instead, I would not describe myself as merely standing on the opposition side of the House, but would rather say I have been driven here, pushed by a concoction of exasperation and overbrimming rage. So evangelical is Keir to the cause of political realism that James and I barely see a handful of minutes go by before the topic rears its ugly head in our household once more. And increasingly, begrudgingly, we listen to Keir as he speaks of the importance of ideals like order, such as he has done tonight. That order is what we should look to first and foremost when considering the management of collective groups of people living together in unity. And then we see his dishes in the sink pile up with hardened, encrusted bits of bread and steak turned to mould.
All I will say is people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Well, feel free to join me on this side of the house then, Keir, as you will see. We see the bins collecting and the bin mountain growing, and we scratch our heads. So, I knew there had to be a flaw in this political realism somewhere. But aside from realism, there is something else which Keir lives and breathes, and that really has been the union for as long as I've known him. I've never met someone with as much drive and determination as him, that pushes him to stay up all night poring over membership data, fielding calls from speakers, and really just thinking all the time about how this place can be as good as possible. Although it has to be said that Keir's most standout skill is fortune-telling. For this is a motion which he designed many months ago. And how could he have done so without the foresight that he would somewhere along the line acquire the perfect personal lived experience needed to illustrate this point? And illustrate this point it does, but the question for us and for me tonight is, does it prove the point? And I think before getting into the real flesh of the motion, it's worth laying out in finer detail what voting in opposition of the motion tonight and in favour of the view that the political realm is ruled by the moral realm does not commit you to. It does not commit you to the view that what would be right for an individual is automatically what should be advanced in society at large. It should almost go without saying that factors which pertain to reality might alter the course of action deemed to be appropriate and applied to different settings and scenarios. Of course, politicians deal with different scenarios from private individuals, and what is the right action for a politician to take may be very different from what the right action would be if they were only acting for themselves or for their family rather than for millions of people. However, that is not the crux of the debate tonight. This debate is meta-ethical. It's about whether politics is itself a branch of applied ethics, is morality writ large. And I am taking the realist on their own terms here, on their own conception of what is at stake. Keir mentioned the realist thinker Matt Sleat in his speech, who laid out some terms of the debate. Realism, he says, need not reject that politics has any relationship with morality or moral concerns, but what it must disavow is the notion that politics can be fully understood in terms of moral first principles. So, in these terms, the political moralist, or the utopian as Keir has called them, understands politics fully in terms of moral first principles. For example, the communist's moral first principle is that we must aim towards equality. Equality is the greatest good in the political realm. The political realist, however, claims that they do not fully understand politics by virtue of some moral first principle. Instead, they claim that when asking themselves how to act, when working out what is right or what is wrong, they look at how politics is rather than what it ought to be. They say they don't need a moral first principle, such as we must aim towards this or that. And the reason is, they claim, that there are a series of self-evident descriptive truths about politics from which we can derive our conclusions about how to act. A legitimate political state is defined by its ability to offer citizens order. This is what separates the political state from a state of anarchy. Therefore, there are intrinsic features of the political state, they say, which give political actors a set of predefined rules to operate under. You can, by definition, only be described as a political agent as opposed to an agent in another sphere if your overriding concern is the preservation of order. These are the rules of the game. Politics is about order. So, going back to Matt Sleat, who Keir mentioned, the realist can supposedly understand politics and be motivated to act within politics, not just based on first moral principles, this is a good, I want to aim at that good, but based on an understanding of the very nature of politics. By definition, we're compelled to value above all else order because this is what politics is. And if you value equality or liberty or pleasure above order, then you have failed to understand politics and its nature. You are operating in the moral realm, not the political realm. I think the appeal of this viewpoint is obvious. Oh, how simple and wonderful it would be if we could escape from swimming around in an endless soup of values and touch down upon dry land, base our views on something more concrete, how things are rather than how we want them to be. In the soup of moral first principles, it is not clear what causes a person to latch onto one principle and not another. Is it just through gut feeling or passion or whim that we might want to aim towards something like equality rather than liberty? Realism says we don't need to choose between these nebulous principles to aim at things in politics. My argument, however, is that the political realists like Keir have very craftily pulled the wool over our eyes in this regard. What seems to be perfectly harmless descriptions of the political state and how it turns out to be is just as value-laden, just as moralistic as those first principles used by the libertarian or by the communist. Let's take their starting point. A political state is, by definition, a generator of order. Well, we then say, clearly not all political states do this. We can think of many historical examples of political states which have enforced upon their populations terrors which would far exceed those which one would experience in a state of anarchy. Indeed, the fact that the state has resources, money, and power makes it uniquely capable of effectively inflicting harm, if it wishes to do so. But here the realist says no, those kinds of states aren't legitimate states. So the realist rules these out by definition. Any states that don't advance order aren't proper states. Whilst I could talk about the shameless adoption of this no true Scotsman fallacy, an even more troubling concern presents itself at this juncture. Is legitimacy a value-laden notion, one which postulates the good and the type of state which is to be desired? I think so. And if we accept that this is how the political realists are using legitimacy, then their so-called descriptive claim dissolves before our very eyes into a normative one. Legitimate states do generate order. It turns into states ought to generate order, or it's good if states generate order. It's legitimate if they do so. And that sounds very much like a moral first principle to me, something which the realists claim to have escaped from entirely. And with that, again, we are plunged back into the soup, swirling around aimlessly. Which moral value should we pick or choose to advance? Order, liberty, equality, or a combination of them? My argument is not designed to show that it would be wrong to aim at order, as the realists suggest, but rather that prioritizing order above all other moral values is something one does based on principles which are by their very nature moral. So, even realist political decisions, it turns out, are entirely dependent upon moral claims. Politics and morality are soulmates yet to be divorced. As someone who studies philosophy, I think in some ways I would have failed to do my duty if I had not taken the side that progress on a philosophical issue such as this is a grand illusion. Philosophers love making no progress at all, of course. But as Keir's housemate, I would have failed at an even more crucial duty if I had not used this public platform to pressure him into doing the bins and doing his dishes.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I've been lucky enough to hear iterations of that argument in different forms throughout the year. We're going to quickly go to a round of floor speeches from the members. So I'm going to ask for those in proposition, opposition, and abstention. Name and college, please, Freddie.
Freddie. At Keyes College. With apologies to standing committee. I want to say that I've understood very little of this speech because I myself studied computer science, not philosophy or history or something clever like that. But I want to argue this in the contrapositive. Not that what is politically right can be morally wrong, but what is morally right can be politically wrong. And I think I speak from experience because I'm a Liberal Democrat. And I think it's... That's the most applause I've ever got for that statement. I've made that statement a lot in this chamber. And Liz Truss and many like them. But I think it's clear that being a Liberal Democrat is morally right. And I know there are many in this chamber who claim to be Conservatives or Labour or, God forbid, Greens, who agree with me that on policy and that we are right about things. But I think it's also clear that being a Liberal Democrat is politically wrong. And I think arithmetically, that is clear because we only have 12 MPs. So I haven't understood the, I'm sure, very intelligent points about Weber, though I was promised by the former president there would be no Weber in his speech, and it took up a good third of that time. But I want to say that whatever the contents of the motion is, it's clear that it's possible to be morally right, as I always am, but politically wrong. Thank you.
I promised to stop giving this bloke airtime next term. Anyone in opposition this evening? Anyone in opposition? Just at the front here.
I think we'll find that if we check the wording of this motion, it is a divergence of the politically right and the morally right is what's at issue. What we've heard is that things can be politically effective, as with floor speech, and morally wrong. But right has to be a value-laden term. And if proposition should like to prove otherwise, I implore them to give us an instance of something that could be politically right and morally wrong, not politically effective and morally wrong, because you'll find plenty of examples throughout history, but politically right in this amoral, but also somehow a political sense. That's my only challenge.
Can you just, at the end, come and give name college to Josh for the minutes? Anyone in abstention this evening?
So, we've heard a lot about great leaders tonight, Keir Bradwell, James Vitale, but I think in proposing that you abstain on this motion, I would look towards two other great leaders, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, from 121 to 180 AD, and Richard M. Nixon, the American emperor from 1969 to 1974 AD. And that is to make the point that once you step into the arena of politics and making decisions, you disclaim any sort of tangential regard to moralism. And so to debate this motion is, away with the fairies. It's improper and irrelevant. And Marcus Aurelius, the closest we've ever had to a philosopher king, a stoic, even he could not govern in the philosophical and moral ways that he proposed in Meditations. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be and be one." And he failed to be one, ultimately. Richard Nixon, on the other hand, suggested that, a politician's got to be nice and smiley and kiss babies on the outside, but he's got to be really cold and nasty and calculating on the inside. And boy, did he take that very far, perhaps too far. So, I would propose that you abstain on this motion, because ultimately, when you enter the arena of politics, moralism goes out the window, and to suggest that there's any relationship between the two that means anything is wrong and shouldn't be countenanced. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Again, please, at the end of the debate, can you come and find Josh and give you a name and college? We're going to motor through to the second round of paper speakers. On the proposition, we have Sir Anthony Selden. Sir Anthony is a historian and educator known for his political biographies of Thatcher, Major, Blair, and other prime ministers. He was previously Master of Wellington College and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Buckingham from 2015 to 2020. He is also an honorary historical advisor to 10 Downing Street. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Can I begin by paying tribute to the outgoing president? 6:53 this morning, I texted Keir about today's arrangements, and he texted back at 6:54. When I was a student, I hadn't gone to bed at 6:53. And what a great man he was. And Phoebe, thank you for proving that Cambridge really is still a male bastion. We got one female speaker, 6 male speakers in this predominantly male. And so Cambridge hasn't changed. And thank you very much. And Phoebe, also thank you for your outstanding philosophy essay with talking about meta-ethical. Can you explain that to me in the bar afterwards? And agents in normative spheres. Now that got me. And also true Scotsman fallacies. That's going to keep me awake at night till you explain that. So Phoebe, a great career obviously there, and clearly you are, like Keir, completely brilliant. Let's get on to the motion though, which is this House believes what is morally wrong, keyword coming up, keyword, may be politically right. Now, look, I agree, and I think that every good human being here tonight agrees that there is obviously an alignment between good morals and good politics. Who would not believe that? But that isn't the motion tonight. It merely says that what is morally wrong may be politically right on occasions, but not always. And so all that we have to do with my fantastic male colleagues on this side here is to show with my male colleagues that there's just some occasions when this doesn't necessarily true, when it may actually be morally wrong and politically right. So we just need some occasions. And let's take the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister may be morally wrong on occasions. I mean, even Anthony, one of his MPs, who's speaking after me, might just agree that the PM can be morally wrong, but he's certainly, all we've got to do is just find one example for us to be right. He is certainly politically right. So the Prime Minister is morally wrong at times and politically right. Take that lovely man, Mr. Farage, Nigel Farage, who supported Brexit, which I know that you all love here. Farage is often morally wrong, but he's most certainly very politically right. Do we agree about that? Yes. Well, good question. Let's take Donald Trump, who is morally deeply wrong and politically deeply right. Now let me just take a question about the fluidity of morals and to show why we are right on our or male side. Morals, let's say, can there's anything that we can agree about on morals? Let's say free speech. Who here thinks that free speech is morally always right? Hands up. And who thinks that it's not always right? Let's take another key issue, euthanasia, termination of life. Is it right to terminate a life? Hands up. Hands up if you think it is. And hands up if you think that it isn't. So again, we are completely split on that. What about killing? What about killing other people? Is that a moral imperative? Phoebe, is it one of your meta-ethical true Scotsman fallacies? Who thinks that? Who thinks that killing is always wrong? So let's take an example, and who thinks that it might? Who thinks that? Well, you've given the answer. So all that we have to do here is just show that there are some occasions when being morally wrong may be politically right, and it's because I think that the issue of morals changes over time. So let's take the Allied bombing of Germany in the Second World War. Yeah.
I think probably that non-religious amongst us would agree that there is not one moral framework which is correct, and there is a diversity of different moral
Yeah.
frameworks that are legitimate. But would you say that someone acting against their own personal moral framework can still be politically right if you're considering the definition of right does not just mean politically?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good point. It's a really good point, and I think the answer is yeah. So we could take somebody like Bomber Harris in charge of the RAF Bomber Command bombing those German cities, but if we look at do we accept that Nazism was an enormous evil and that there were knowing deaths, a moral wrong of innocent civilians to achieve a politically right end, which was the decimation of the German war effort. Let's take another example. Yeah.
I am unconvinced, and I'd love to hear more from a historical expert, unlike myself, who just did a degree in it here. But the Dresden bombings were effective in ending the Second World War. What evidence is there for that claim?
That is such a good point. And if you'd listened just back to what I said that we can sweep that on one side, but the mainstream of or are you saying that the bombing of the German war effort wasn't actually necessary and politically right in terms of depleting, which was my point. So thank you for agreeing with me. Excellent. You are absolutely, you're beginning to learn, and that is encouraging. And your friends never thought that would be possible with you. Let's take terrorism now. Is it worthwhile? Is it ever morally right to destroy lives surrounding a terrorist bomb, factory, innocent people there for the sake of that greater moral benefit about securing the elimination of the bombs that would kill hundreds of innocent people? So I'm saying these are examples. What about another one loved by many Cambridge academics and KUKA love it. The notion.
I think you mean Cambridge Union when you say that.
What's the difference? Apart from it being female run. And so you have there you have a third of young people. I mean, look at this. I mean, none of you are failures. But did you know that 1/3 of people are failing our education system who come from the most deprived backgrounds? They don't pass the government's metrics on passing at GCSE, and the system requires them to fail. They're called the forgotten third, and by the way, because they're told that the system has failed them, that's the message that they go on in life. So I'm supposed to be supporting this notion that it's necessary to have a moral bad for a greater political end, which is a education system in which the majority succeed. So I think those would be examples. I just want to come on, and I want to close actually here with the Prime Minister's favourite philosopher. But all I've tried to do is show that there are some, although you'll disagree, some examples where to be morally wrong, because of the fluidity, that was my point about what we mean by morals, and because something that is morally wrong in the short term might be actually morally and politically right in the long term, to plant in your mind the seed of that doubt that actually all we have to do is say that there are some occasions. I just want to come back and finish with the PM's greatest philosopher. And I would say greater philosopher, greater mind than Marcus Aurelius. And dare I say this, former president, greater mind even than Max Weber. And I'm talking, of course, about Peppa Pig. And Peppa Pig said, I don't know what morals mean, and I don't know what politics mean, but I do know the proposition is always right.
Thank you, Sir Anthony. I think for the record, I should just state, Sir Anthony, that the Michaelmas departing team had 4 women on it, and one male, and the president incoming for Easter is a woman. Nonetheless, we move to the opposition, and Anthony Brown. Anthony is a Conservative MP for South Cambridgeshire. He was previously a journalist at The Times, the BBC, and is a former advisor to Boris Johnson. Anthony, you have the ears of the House.
Keir, well done on your presidency. And James, I look forward to you becoming as famous as Keir and hearing your apologies on the Today programme. Hopefully not next week or tomorrow. I'll try not to get cancelled today. I should say I have actually got absolutely no idea what I'm about to say, because I'm a last-minute stand-in here, and I only agreed to it this morning, and I've been in meetings absolutely all day. And I could look at this proposition, I could actually argue both ways. Like Boris in his essay on Brexit, I could say, well, this is the argument for this. And I was listening to all the speeches beforehand, and I wanted to speak at the end, thinking I'll get great insight in other people's speeches and clarify my view. I'm with Anthony Selden here, I have to say. So I listened to those first 2 speeches, and I think I'm a reasonably bright person. I didn't understand anything, really. I'm actually a mathematician by training. I went to Trinity Hall, Cambridge as well. Any other mathematicians here? No? Anyone from Trinity Hall? Yeah, we've got mathematicians and Trinity Hall. I like to think of myself as a reasonably logical person, but actually, although I did a maths degree, I changed at the beginning of my third year to social and political science. I have an interest in politics, clearly my current job. And I had, as I was explaining over dinner, I had huge rows with my social and political science lecturers and professors, because I'm very keen on scientific methodology, and they were trying to apply scientific methodology to social and political science, and they were completely and utterly failing to do it. And all my essays were why my professors were wrong, and I realized this was not a successful strategy for getting a degree. So I went back to studying mathematics in my third term. And my tutor at the time told me I was the first person in the history of Cambridge University to change from social and political science to mathematics. So that's my only first, I think, in my life. But I look at this essay, hear the speeches, and look at the proposition. I am just a humble practitioner here. I'm just a jobbing politician, and these people are writing great philosophical essays about what I do for a job. And it reminds me when I was a journalist. I was a journalist 20 years at the Times, BBC, and Observer, and occasionally I'd come to these media studies students and talk to them, and they'd write these very long, complicated essays about how people choose which newspaper stories to write. And it's like, and they'd go into great treatises about it. And actually, we just wrote that story because we thought it was quite interesting, and it was we thought people would want to read it. Politics. Clearly, you need morality in politics. I mean, there's a reason why people go into politics, and it's not about money. It's because, for almost all politicians, it's because they want to make the world a better place. And different people have different ideas of what a better place is and how to get there. But that is their underlying principle. And a lot of the debates in the House of Commons that you have, none of them mention meta-ethics, I have to say. I haven't come across that term. We should check it, hands up. There is a lot of underlying morality there and about what is moral and what isn't moral, and different people have different morals, as we were discussing earlier. That is absolutely right, but it absolutely underpins pretty much all political decisions. But there is, in my mathematical, logical way, I was looking at this, what's morally wrong and politically right? Well, things can be morally right and politically wrong, the counter position. Yes.
What could possibly be morally right about blocking young people from owning a home in this country by killing the planning bill simply because you lost in Cheshire and Hampshire? What could possibly be morally right about that?
No, I agree. I absolutely. So this is where means and ends. I absolutely agree. There's a huge 86% of people want to own their own home. And I agree. It's absolute a moral imperative for governments to enable people to own their own homes. I just don't think that the planning bill, as proposed, was the right way to do it. So we can have a long planning debate. If you have a planning debate here, put that on the schedule. I'm an expert on planning policy. What I'm saying, you can have things that are morally wrong and bad politics. Strangling kittens, for example. Clearly that is a bad idea. Or something that's been in the news recently, pouring sewage into rivers. Clearly that's morally wrong, and clearly it's really bad politics. And by the way, for those who are misinformed by lots of fake news, we did not vote for that. But anyway, that's something that's morally wrong and bad politics. There are things that can be... Yes.
I think the debate is that there are things that are morally wrong and that can be bad politics. The point is that some morally wrong things can also be good politics, not all morally wrong things.
Yep, I will come to that. There are things that are moral and look at my time. Things that are moral things to do, but bad politics. For example, something we voted on recently, tax on petrol, I think is a morally right thing to do, increasing the tax on petrol to combat climate change, but believe me, it's bad politics. You will get a lot of protests across the country about that. That's why the government hasn't been doing it. There are things, and this is the point here, that can be morally wrong and good politics. In a sense, I'm agreeing with the other side here. But I mean, like the death sentence in the US, for example. I mean, I don't know how you've clearly got followers of American politics here, but often you get American politicians who sort of champion killing people on death row. I think that's immoral, but it's clearly they think in that circumstance it's good politics. But there are things that are what we should aim for. That is the politics as it is sometimes, occasionally, may happen. I think what we should do is aim for politics where what is moral is good politics. And there's a really key point here that all governments should try to do, which is actually turn the things that are moral into good politics. If you see something that's you think moral, but actually you find it difficult getting it over the line, then you need to change the terms of political debate. And this is what governments try and do. And I'm going to say one big example, which is climate change. I used to be environment editor of The Observer and The Times. I'm chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the environment. And I can tell you 20 years ago or so, there was very little consensus on climate change. And any action that the government took to tackle climate change was really, really bad politics. And the politics has changed, and it's changed because of, partly Greta Thunberg and partly Extinction Rebellion, and I don't follow I don't agree with the way they do things, but they've certainly changed opinion. And now you've got a situation where action on climate change, which is the moral thing to do, is aligned with good politics. And that's what politics should be about. It's about not just what it is, but actually what it should be. And that's what all government should aspire to do, is actually change the terms of the debate so you can do the right thing. And that's certainly what I try to do as a politician. Yes, occasionally things may be morally wrong, they may be politically right, but that doesn't make it right that you follow that. And you should change the terms of the political debate so that you do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. We will quickly move to another round of floor speeches. Does anyone have anything to say in proposition of the motion this evening? Just at the front here, please. And name and college, if you won't mind.
I have a slight chocolate stain on my shirt, which is rather embarrassing. My name is Oliver. I'm from Robinson. I'm not sure whether I'm proposition, but I think I am. But one of the things that really saddens me that so far in this debate that has not been mentioned has been the response to COVID. And I think I'd like to make a comparison that our government acted so immorally at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I think that a complete lack of understanding, a complete lack of consideration for human life basically meant that hundreds of thousands of people died on our government's hands. And they were immoral in their thinking. I think if you compare this with the response of other countries, notably in East Asia, they have a far more impassioned and far more care for human life. I think the moral duty of governments to protect human life was a failure during COVID. And I think that's one example of how our government just seems to neglect that element. But thank you very much for our speakers. Very good.
Thank you. Anyone in opposition of the motion this evening? Name and college, please.
I'm Alex, Trinity Hall, also doing maths. Slightly ashamed to be sharing a degree in college with a Tory MP. No, so everyone's saying that you're doing things that are morally wrong, that are giving you political gains. Has anyone given an example of this? Let's look at our most electorally successful politicians over the 20th century. I'm thinking of Tony Blair, Barack Obama, and when they first came to power and when they first won their landslides, they were all pretty boring. What was Tony Blair's biggest failure as a politician? Iraq, a massive moral failure that has now doomed him politically to be seen by everyone as a warmonger. What was Obama's biggest failure? His warmongering stance in the Middle East, which has now seen him, his moral failure has translated to a depressed political legacy. There isn't an example of a politician doing something slightly dodgy, a slight cheeky bit of corruption that's given massive political gains. I haven't seen any examples. To the third speaker on the proposition, is he listening? No, he's not. To the third speaker on the proposition, give a bloody example. The biggest moral failure we've seen in this country over the last year has been Matt Hancock messing up with his morals on one night in April. And that ruined his career politically. He's trying to make a comeback. He's not. So, if you want me to vote for the proposition, can you give an example? Christopher. Thank you.
Well, Christopher, the challenge has been laid down. Anyone want to make a speech in abstention?
I think perhaps...
Name and college, please.
Tamara Himani Katz. I think perhaps like part of the uncertainty with this debate is if we focus not on moral right versus political right, but actually what is politically right, which has been raised a couple times, and what is politically effective versus politically right. So if we regard what is politically right, according to the doctrines of realism, order, peace, more peace than you would get in the state of nature, security, authority, and then we see what is politically effective as the way to achieve that right, which is, electoral success, maintaining your power and authority as a government, then perhaps we can say that the real clash comes when the definition of what is politically right is skewed or manipulated in order to serve the interests of those in power. So, for example, saying, and obviously this is common with a lot of totalitarian and authoritarian regimes, saying that you are doing something for the good of the people and for the general authority and security of the people, when it is in reality just a need to advance your own power interests. And this is on an international scale as well as on a domestic political scale. So perhaps if we consider politics broadly as kind of, when morality motivates politics, we can see it as kind of the weighing up of different values and different utilitarian interests, as was mentioned by the second speaker to the proposition. But perhaps the real kind of moral bad comes in not trying to be politically right and trying to look after people, but when your own power interests come in through that in a way that is not beneficial to the people. I'm not really sure what side that serves. I just felt it was an important distinction.
Thank you, Tamara. We move to the final pair of paper speakers this evening. And on the proposition is Christopher George. Christopher is a second-year historian at Wolfson College. He's also the union's bench-moving extraordinaire, which is the head of events management this term, and he is the debates officer-elect serving this Easter. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and I look forward to the coming term, and cheers again for Keir for a good one. I am unfortunately not a philosopher. I'm also the only student not part of your household, so I feel slightly left out. And also I know it's late and Keir took up most of my time, so I'll try and keep it vaguely short. So yeah, I am not particularly well versed in much, but in my mind, to do something that is politically right is to do something that furthers your political objectives. And that is how I take it. So if I'm doing something morally wrong, nah, Joe, you're right. Doing something morally wrong furthers these objectives, then it is politically right. That is how I take it. I don't do philosophy. We can talk later. This is able to occur, in my mind, because a hierarchy exists within the realm of politics. Voters, parties, politicians, pundits, all have political objectives that they prioritize above morals, some morals. They are willing to varying degrees to overlook these things that are morally wrong if it advances their political objectives until a point. An example of this in action can be found on YouTube pretty easily. Roy Moore was the 2017 Republican Senate candidate in Alabama. I'm sure some of you know his name. He had twice been removed as the Chief Justice.
Where do you think these people get their political values and their political goals?
I think that is a debate for a different night. Well, it's a really interesting question. As in, I could say that I don't necessarily view their political things coming from their morals necessarily. I think it comes from their background, their upbringing, or simply just their economic interests, you could say. But I digress. So Roy Moore, the Senate candidate in Alabama, he's been twice removed as Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court for judicial misconduct, and at the time of the election was facing allegations of sexually assaulting underage women. This is not a man who did morally right things. Some of Moore's supporters were interviewed about these allegations and their continued support for him. One said, even if it's true, I don't want to give up a Senate seat. Even if it's true, I don't want to give up a Senate seat. Here is the clearest example of political objectives overriding moral objections. Another said that he was still supporting Moore, but wouldn't if he was accused of shoplifting. This is the hierarchy of priorities at work within some voters. Some morally wrong actions are acceptable in the name of what they believe is politically right, whilst others are not. Yes, Lee? I'm coming to that. Yeah, don't Don't worry, Liddy. Wait for it. So the remaining opposition speaker may like to point out that Roy Moore lost. There you go. Thankfully, he lost. But then I remind you that Trump won his in 2016, that Marjorie Taylor Greene won her election to the House of Representatives in 2020, both of whom lied, both of whom sought to overturn the 2020 election, and whom both have cut deep divisions in American society. It is clear that until a point, doing something that is morally wrong will not hurt you politically. However, that is, of course, not the motion tonight. I will endeavour to convince you more than, if you haven't already, by my colleagues, that what is morally wrong may be, not always, but sometimes, politically right. We could discuss a plethora of examples. COVID was raised as a great one. Gerrymandered districts that lead to the underrepresentation of opposition parties. In 2014, 40% of the people in the state of Ohio voted for Democrats, but 75% of representatives were Republican. Undermining democracy by fixing district boundaries, I would argue, is clearly a morally wrong act that is nonetheless politically right. That is, if you are a Republican and just want to win. Working extensively with states that carry out human rights abuses, we would largely, I think, agree that this is morally wrong for our government to do, but it's politically right as it makes governance easier. Perhaps it's easier to preserve order. Yeah.
If politics is completely devoid of morality, then why is politics preferable to Kier's state of nature, to physical violence or fighting? Why is it helpful to hear opposing views and to start there and build some kind of consensus?
So I don't think that politics is entirely devoid of morality. I just think there is, in some ways, a scale of morality where political objective sits above some morals for some people, and some morals are above that, if that makes sense. So I don't think it's entirely devoid. I think they are related. I think politicians do tend to go in for moral reasons, even if that changes later on down the line. So you might consider well, it's morally wrong to undermine someone's trust in reliable sources of information or spread alternative facts that distort the truth. But in doing so, you draw your base closer, making it easier to preserve your power. Doing what is morally wrong may be politically right. This is clear even in the movie Mean Girls. When Katie seeks to depose Regina of the leadership of the Plastics, she breaks up Regina's relationship, she lies about nutrition bars, and she turns her friends against her. She is successful. By the end of the movie, the high school hierarchy is broken down. Everyone is happy in their own skin, and we presume live happily ever after. But the point still stands that doing what is morally wrong was politically right, as it gained Katie the status and power she sought. This final point is applicable to all the examples I've given so far. Yes, Moore lost his Senate race. Yes, Trump lost in 2020. Yes, the Plastics fell apart as a group at the end of the movie. All those people who have done things that are morally wrong for political gain appear to have been punished for doing so, perhaps making one question whether ultimately doing what is morally wrong may be politically wrong too. To those having such thoughts, let us remind you that Trump appointed 3 members of the US Supreme Court that is now poised to curtail a woman's right to choose. The tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans he oversaw are still largely in place. His lies have allowed him to remain the largest figure in the Republican Party, and despite everything that he did, Trump was very, very nearly re-elected. Biden only won the key states of Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin by a total of less than 45,000 votes. By doing what is morally wrong, Trump experienced political gain and continues to find success. Those that voted for him and support got largely what they wanted. In all, our democratic system allows what is morally wrong to be politically right because it's reliant upon the people, the electorate, to be the final judge, jury, and executioner. And they have their own personal, moral, and political priorities to consider. If they do not consider an act sufficiently morally egregious to warrant the sacrifice of their own objectives, then it will be largely overlooked, and the green light given to politicians to carry on. It's therefore beneficial to lie, to cheat, to distort, to undermine, to hurt, to gain political advantage, because the electorate doesn't choose a candidate because they are necessarily a morally upstanding person. It might help, but as we've seen with Trump and others, it won't stop them. They choose and support the candidate that is part of their team, their tribe, or at least will be mutually beneficial to their perceived interests. I agree with Anthony Brown, it'd be lovely if politics and morality were absolutely identical, and I really wish this was the case. But until such a time that we find a way to change our political system, what is morally wrong may be politically right. And that is the sorry but real state of affairs. Thank you.
Christopher, thank you. I didn't have you down as a Mean Girls fan, but I enjoyed that greatly. Rounding off the debate this evening is Gabriel Barton-Singer. This is happening at an increasingly frequent rate, but Gabriel was dragged into this debate at the very last minute. Thank you for coming, Gabriel. He is a former president of this society, and unsurprisingly, he now finds himself unemployed and looking for work. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honour to be speaking in tonight's debate, and I think I'm going to start with a little bit of rebuttal in reverse order. So we're going to end with the gentleman over there who spoke about Mean Girls. Now, the powerful moment in Mean Girls is not the betrayal of Regina George. The powerful moment is when she breaks up the crown of the prom queen and hands it to everybody. Now, that is a moment which politically for her is wrong, but morally it's so right, because they all deserve, they're all special that night, and that is the key point. There were some floor speeches made. We heard about Marcus Aurelius and Richard Nixon. All I have to say on that is that I agree with Hunter S. Thompson that Richard Nixon should have been burned in a trash can and buried at sea, and that Marcus Aurelius is a great example of how moral excellence should try to motivate politics, but it won't always succeed. But the key point raised on the floor, I think, was Joe from Trinity, a great college. There was the lady over there, I didn't catch your name, from Cats. You agree with me. It's about what we mean by politically right, and I'm going to get into that later. But I also have a point of agreement with Sir Anthony Selden, who said, I was beginning to learn, and it's true. In my first term here at Cambridge, I read his collected essays on Blair, and it is how I've begun to learn. And it's a great honour to be debating opposite him. He said the key word was may, and we'll get back to that in a moment. And Keir, you said, as you opened this, that you were about to be swept off. And let me be the living proof that when you're an ex-president, you're not swept off. You are the unflushable turd of the society. They can't get rid of you. Freddie over there made some comments about how being a Lib Dem was morally right, but never politically right. And I just think, raise your ambitions, Freddie. Raise your ambitions. We're going to discuss William Gladstone later, and he was a Liberal Democrat, and he was in power 4 times as Prime Minister. Now, I'm speaking last in this debate today, and that reflects my status. I am a last resort speaker, even more than my colleagues. I was asked to speak in this, I believe, and I'm going to check the phone here, 4.5 hours ago. And these 4.5 hours have given me time to consider this motion with the seriousness it merits. But I was left in some quandary as to how to interpret this motion. Option 1 is quite simple. There has been, Mr. President, a typo. The motion should read, this House believes that what is morally wrong may be politically right-wing. Now, this motion is too easy to dismiss out of hand. It obviously does not go far enough. In fact, to sound like some wine-soaked right-wing Tory backbencher circa 2018, may is simply not strong enough. We must replace may immediately. What is politically right-wing must always be morally wrong. So the motion would obviously fail. That option was much too easy for such esteemed fellow speakers as we have here tonight. So I looked at option 2. This House believes what is morally wrong may be politically right, i.e., sometimes morally wrong things are also politically wrong. And I thought I could take on a Machiavellian persona, much like the former president, and respond in Manichaean mood that no, anything morally right must be politically wrong. Politics is about the maintenance and abuse of power. To do things for their moral worth will always be a political faux pas, always put one on the back foot. And this philosophy, disregarded by the statesmen and women of the 20th century, has had something of a popular resurgence. But as Dominic Cummings has now left Downing Street, I thought it was best to leave this interpretation somewhere near Barnard Castle. I shall take this motion at face value and oppose it for the traditional reason. Truth, goodness, and the moral force of William Gladstone. Of course, it cannot be politically right to do things which are evil. We must stand on principle, ladies and gentlemen, or we will not stand at all. No, I won't. I don't have time. I liked your comments earlier, but I just don't. We must distinguish the politically effective with the politically correct. And I don't mean politically correct in the sense of a Times columnist desperate for attention, with all due respect to the former president, and I understand also Anthony Brown. What I mean is we must distinguish what works, what makes politics function, from what being politically right is. Mr. President, in trying to describe what I mean, I was put in the mind of Portia in her appeal to justice in The Merchant of Venice. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. It is the mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch, better than his crown. What is politically right are those decisions and actions which are twice blessed. They do not just achieve the reforms sought out and push on the political wheel so it functions. No, these changes dignifies those who push them forward, and they are rare moments. I'm thinking of the Good Friday Agreement, of Mandela walking free. The proposition have an unreasonable expectation that they can be politically right regularly, that the fisheries bill at third reading can be politically right. Politics is dirty, it's rough, it's ready, and being right is extraordinary, rare, and beautiful. And my concern is that if tonight's motion is passed, we shall conflate what is politically effective with that which is politically right in a truer sense. The danger of proposition's position is in its certainty. Proposition will conflate what works for them with what is true. They won't simply say politicians have to do things which are morally wrong. They shall say they are right to do things which are morally wrong. And we only have to look over the pond to see the danger of believing in political victory at all costs. I shan't, thank you. In complete disregard for any truth beyond what will pass Congress, whip up votes, whip up your base, all justified by conflating what works with what is right. Cynicism will cease to be, with the proposition, a mechanism by which we deliver change, but it will be seen as the virtue in itself. We will throw political caution to the wind and replace the self-awareness that we have on opposition, that we are rarely right, and we're just getting by, just being expedient, with loving ourselves for being cynical. We will love ourselves not just for being cynical, but for being mediocre, for delivering half measures and half change. Politics is a grey game, inevitably, where we deal in subtle degrees of the progress we can make today. Opposition accepts that. And it's that greyness that means what is politically expedient is not absolutely right. Mr. Bradwell, as we've heard, is a fan of Weber, whose hero was Gladstone. Tonight's inspiration. Gladstone brought moral certainty external to politics, to that political grey game. The rightness of his political decisions never came from the fact they were effective in themselves. It came from the fact his policies represented ideological truths about the world as he saw it. That view in these days is rare, and our politics is poorer for it. Cynicism may work to keep government functioning, but it is second best to the kind of lasting transformation that Gladstone achieved. Political rightness is rare, special, precious, and something fundamentally different from what merely works, and we should not compromise. We should not settle for second best in this house or anywhere, and this country has got far too used to settling for second best. Proposition asks you something fundamentally unreasonable. They want to be given moral praise for half measures, and I say no. We must keep political rightness, political truth, political justice on our horizon. And I'm thinking again of those twice blessed moments. I'm thinking of Good Friday and Seamus Heaney's words from the Cure at Troy. Once in a lifetime, that longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. Hold on for that moment. Hold on for something better than what merely works. All of you in this chamber have the power to be excellent rather than merely functional or mediocre. And cynicism should never be our ideal, never be our idol. We should not afford it the status of being morally right, and we do not need to make the enemy of the good the best to know that we can do better than this. I ask this House to reject self-congratulatory cynicism. I ask this House to reject this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. If it wasn't clear to anyone, Gabriel is a fan of William Gladstone. I have no notices. It's the end of term, so I will simply wish you a very Merry Christmas. It's been a wonderful term. It's my sincere hope that we all be here in person enjoying more debates next term. For those of you that have done lots of these debates before, we vote on our feet. There's an aye door, a no door, and an abstain door. Please leave orderly, but they'll be taking a vote through the door as you go. And please join us in the bar to find out the results afterwards. Thank you very much.